The Nigerian political tension, or Nigerian political tension rather, has become arguably West Africa and Africa's most controversial political crisis in recent time, with talks of a return to democratic governance rejected by the military ruler, General Abdulrahmane Chiani. The military junta in Niger has, however, stated that it is open to dialogue. The West African sub-region, however, has had to deal with a huge amount of political instability and leadership crises, and the intervention by ECOWAS has revealed is in a bid to control the situation. Now, the Commission has restated that it is not in Niger for war, but to return the country of the democratically elected President Mohamed Bazoum to power. General Thierry, on his part, has also revealed the intention or intervention of the military is to prevent a further deterioration in the country's security. But with the experience of other coups in the West African sub-region, ECOWAS certainly isn't accepting the military's region. Nigeria shares a border with Niger and is one of the most important security and economic partners of that country. Diplomatic ties between both nations are currently shaky, and an immediate fix has been sought by the citizens of both Nigeria and Niger. Tonight on Politics HQ, we'll look at the political situation in Niger and its impact on Nigeria, ECOWAS, and the entire African continent. I'd like to say a very good evening to you and also to our guests. Ambassador Joe Keshi is a former permanent secretary, Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Nigeria. Ambassador, good evening to you.
Good evening, and wonderful to be with you.
All right. We're also joined by security analyst, Mr. Alex Okonkwo. Alex, good evening to you.
Good evening. It's a pleasure to be here.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, gentlemen. I'm sure you've both been keenly following the situation, unfolding situation in Niger. It seems like a war movie, so really well scripted, but it's a reality of our time. Why are we seeing, I'll start with you, Ambassador, why are we seeing a return to what we saw in the 60s, beginning in the 60s and going on to the 70s and 80s in this time in West Africa? It could, have been thought that West Africa had moved on from the days of military coups, but we see a return. What do you think is responsible for this, Ambassador?
Well, very simple. Bad governance, lack of democratic practice by leaders, politicians, underdevelopment, poverty, corruption. You can name all these things as reasons for one coup or the other. When you look at the 1960s, with the benefit of hindsight, the first country the coup took place was Togo. There was actually no clear-cut reason for the coup in Togo, except that the returnees from the the Togolese who fought in the French war in Indonesia, were not satisfied with how they were being rehabilitated at home. And then they just decided, to sack the government of Goniski. And subsequently, coup became fashionable. Never mind that in some instances, the West also contributed to overthrowing one or two governments. But generally, the military took over because it was fashionable. And to make the situation, to compound the situation, the West and Western analysts started arguing that the military was best suited for the continent because they looked at the cultural division and the crisis in Africa at that time, and they argued that Africa needed a strong man or strong men. And actually, one book I always refer to that was written and propagated military rule in the continent was The Men on Horseback. I think everybody should read that and see how the West, tried to give legitimacy to military rule then. Halfway down the line, they saw the disaster that the military itself has created in the continent. Again, they went 360 and started talking of entrenching democracy and the like of it. Now here we are in the 20s, 2023 to be precise. Okay, we now have different issues. Not only is democracy not taking root particularly in West Africa, for the simple reason that the leaders themselves have not comported themselves, in vis-a-vis their democratic credentials. If you take every one of them, including those who are in power today, you will find a lot of questions, whether they are truly Democrats or they are demagogues or they are just dictators, the way they do things. And so you now find that they provide reasons for the military, to gradually return back again. And my fear is that, as I said earlier, these things become fashionable. Once it has succeeded in one country, succeeds in another, succeeds in another. Once there is crisis, as it is in almost all these countries, the military themselves begin to say, look, we need to do what our colleagues have done. And before you know it, we are back to another era of military, takeover of governments all over the place. But when you look at individual countries, there are reasons why the military is intervening. The Malians gave an example that they were sent to the war front to deal with the insecurity situation, but they were not provided with their wherewithal to fight. How on earth do you send people to fight and you do not give them the means to combat and when you go around these areas where you have military coup, it's almost the same reasons that the leaders were not doing enough to provide the military enough. That's not to say that the military themselves didn't have their own ambition, as in the case of Niger.
Interesting. Alex, what are your thoughts on this? I mean, give us your own perspective as to why we've seen a resurgence in coups in West Africa and forceful regime change.
Well, I think the Honorable Ambassador has mentioned a lot of points, and I would only align myself to that by adding that the insecurity aspect of it is huge. The fact that the civilian regimes in this country have showed or have given the impression not to be able to tackle the insecurity problems that have covered West Africa for the last 10 years. Let's just limit it to 10 years. And then there are divisions. One thing people always believe the military can do is to work without ethnic lines. It's not really true, but it's a romantic way of seeing the military that even in Nigeria, we have that feeling that once the military comes, they can do things without necessarily thinking of political parties, ethnicity, religion, and all that. And so people in periods of insecurity and abject poverty tend to fall back on the military because they believe they would do these things without bias. Don't forget that this region you're talking about is the region that still gave us people like Thomas Sankara and gave us people like Jerry Rawlings. So even the younger ones are reading about these military rulers that came at a particular time and changed their countries. So it is romantic, it's fashionable, like the Honorable Ambassador would say, for people who were not really living in the times when these things happened, when the real military coups happened in West Africa. So there's an aspect of, yes, poverty, insecurity, but there's also an aspect of it is the tendency is sweet. You saw people supporting the Nigerian junta. The military, people are supporting them on the streets, not knowing what the consequences would be like. People are even happy that the Wagner group that almost caused a coup in a sort of military coup in Russia are going to take part in defending them. So you see, it's romantic. It's simply fashionable. It doesn't mean it's realistically, it can hold for a while, but people enjoy the fact that they can count on something in uniform that will come and don't have bias in settling some of their issues.
All right. I'll stay with you, Alex. The Nigerian junta, they vowed to today and yesterday, we talked about it, to prosecute ousted President Mohamed Bazoum for what they allege to be treason and security risk. And of course, when we hear treason, that you know what that comes with, the penalties for that. So how do you think this will affect the current situation, Alex?
This is a delicate situation. Let's be totally honest and frank. Bazoum comes from the minority Arab group in Niger. They are a minority Arab. You can see even in his skin color, he looks more Tunisian than Nigerian. It's the first time they're having a president from that region in Niger. He was a former minister of Interior, and he was one of those who actually pushed to retire some of the generals, including this Chani. So I'm not immediately saying that yes, one of the two These two things go together. But there can be a soft lining where what is going on now is not just political, because Bazoum has not been president for long. So some of the issues that Niger has cannot necessarily be all figured down to Bazoum's regime. He has not been president for, I think, just a year and a half or something. Yes, he has had issues of insecurity, but I think there might be an underlining, an ethnic underlining or an interest part of it, because they want to judge him. How can a military junta judge the civilian president? Are they going to use normal justices? Are they going to use the military court martial? You see, a lot of questions come up immediately when these things are being said. So I have my doubts as to the honesty in judging a president who has been there for just a short time, and but who has been there for a while as a political leader, and who has interest in diminishing the military, the current military leadership, and of which Chani was part of it. And he has always said he wanted to clean them up because he thought that the fault is theirs in not tackling the insecurity that Niger is suffering. Don't forget, Niger is a huge country. Nigerians don't always remember. They have all the terrorist groups in the world have factions in Niger. In fact, that's why the Americans are there, to try to help them. So Niger is a bomb that is waiting to explode.
Before I move to the next question, just to give you a chance, Ambassador, to say something on this, the fact that Bazoum will be charged for treason, alleged treason. What do you think he's done that is treasonable? What do you think Bazoum has done as president of Niger that amounts to constituting a security risk that he's to be charged for? It sounds a bit bizarre, if you ask me. Yeah, Ambassador, can you hear me, please? Okay, Ambassador, if you're there, if you can't hear me, we'll just try and reconnect with you. But Alex, back to you. Has the man done anything that you're aware of that can constitute, treason and being a security risk?
No. To my knowledge, nothing that we know. I mean, out there in the press. What I know is that he wanted to cleanse the army, as the armed forces. Sorry, the Niger has the air force and the army. So the armed forces in general, and he suspects. I'm talking of Bazoum now. Bazoum suspects that the generals, of which Chani is part of them, are a bit falsifying the actions that the government has been doing, because the Nigerian government has had a lot of support from the EU, the French government, and the US over years. This is not recent. Over years, to stop terrorism, to check their borders. You know, they have borders with Algeria and Libya. These are very, very, very delicate borders. So they have a lot of support. In fact, sometimes they have a lot of more surveillance equipment than we do, because the US has really invested and has a base on ground. Why are they not fighting terrorism? So Bazoum himself was preparing to cleanse the army. So I'm suspecting there is a bit of revenge here. That is my first analysis without having all the details inside. Now, if the president has done something wrong in a country and that is treasonable, is it the army that will charge him to court, or is it their Senate or their political process? So all this sounds a little bit funny for us here in Nigeria. It wouldn't work like that. There should be a process where the president should be impeached or whatever. It cannot be the army telling the president that he has done something treasonable. So I suspect there's a bit of interest here, more personal than most of us think.
All right. Ambassador Keshi, do we have you back, please? All right. We're still with Alex. Alex, after weeks of resisting diplomatic overtures from the United Nations, they resisted diplomatic overtures from the African Union. They also resisted diplomatic overtures from ECOWAS. The military leaders met with Nigerian Islamic clerics in Niamey on Saturday, and they finally, after meeting with these Islamic clerics, agreed to discuss with ECOWAS and enter into talks with them. What, in your opinion, did the ulamas, these Islamic clerics, do or have that was enough to persuade the junta or junta leaders to meet with them, and not only that, agree to meet with and dialogue with ECOWAS? We had the likes of Abubakar, former head of state, and the sultans, who could not even get to leave the airport when they got to Niamey. Yes.
This is purely diplomacy. Somebody must have advised them. I think, it's the story of when two dogs bark, and then after a while they start to play together. You're wondering if they are enemies or friends. I think we got to a position, first, by having a president on our side. I'm talking of ECOWAS president, who happens to be our own president. So we must be clear, he was talking on behalf of ECOWAS, who put the cart before the horse. So there's no need of talking of military intervention before discussing. That was a mistake, and I think he knows it. It was a bit of an excitement. And then on the other side, the other dog that I was talking about that gets angry because everybody's backing at them, and they now retreat to their own angle. These clerics, and before them, the Emir Sanusi, offered a bridge for discussion, and it's a normal process in democracy. It should have come earlier, but it's coming up now. It gives both parties a chance to start a discussion, the normal discussion. So each one will make a step coming forward to the other. The Nigerians don't have any interest to go to war with ECOWAS, while we, as Nigerians, and even under ECOWAS, don't have any interest because the first refugees will come to Nigeria. The first refugees of that war will come into Nigeria. And our borders are huge. We have 1,500 kilometers of border with Niger Republic. My brother, there is no way we will man those borders. We've not been able to man them for years. We won't start doing it now. So there are no side here has interest to go into purely military intervention. I think what ECOWAS was saying, and we've done it before, ECOWAS has done it before, in Guinea-Bissau and all that, is to have men on ground within a zone to make sure that the political leaders are not being hunted, people like Bazoum are not being executed, and things like that. It's a process. We cannot go into conflict. So what the clerics have offered is a sacrosanct occasion for conversations to start. Don't forget, these clerics are the ones that risk the most because the northern part of Nigeria is more at risk if there is a conflict. Nobody in Port Harcourt will have any issue. But people in Sokoto, in Katsina, in Borno will suffer more any of the consequences. In fact, they're suffering now from the embargo. You know, there's an embargo going on. So the trade has diminished seriously. So it is normal that they are the ones at the front line going to do what I call non-state actors who take part in diplomacy. It's a very normal process. It's just that it should have come earlier and not after the menace of military intervention.
All right. I'll come back to that, later on. But Ambassador Joe Keshi, we have you back. Do we have you back, sir?
I don't know if you can hear me.
I certainly can hear you. Thank you very much. Welcome back. Sorry about the network there. But Ambassador, Lamine Zieni, an economist at the African Development Bank, former minister right there in Niger, was recently appointed by the Junta as Prime Minister of Niger. And we've seen some progress in recent days. Would you describe this action of appointing a civilian into a leadership role such as Prime Minister? We saw this, in the 60s and in the 70s with a lot of military governments in West Africa having prime ministers. Do you think this was a master stroke by the coup leaders? And what role do you think this appointment of a prime minister, someone of the ilk of Lamine Zieni, what role do you think his appointment has played?
Can you hear me?
Yes. Can you hear me, sir? Ambassador Keshi, please, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
All right, fantastic. All right, I can hear you. Fantastic, thank you. So I'm asking what role do you think the appointment of Lamine Zieni, an economist with the African Development Bank based in Chad, what role do you think his appointment as Prime Minister of Niger has played in making sure things, calm down? Do you think his appointment was a master stroke by the coup leaders?
Well, I to a good of their economy to with and have really family going for the wise situation. Certainly, it might help them make in ways.
All right, Ambassador, I'm sincerely sorry for that. We'll have to get back to you. But while we're trying to do that, Alex, what are your thoughts on this last question I asked Ambassador about Prime Minister Zieni? Yes.
Of course, it's a masterstroke. I like your phrase of that. It's a masterstroke, definitely, because it shows that they want to get back to democratic process very quickly. In any case, in essence, military regimes are supposed to be transitional. Otherwise, they become very quickly a dictatorship. So they themselves know. Don't forget, Niger Republic is also part of ECOWAS. We must not talk as if Niger Republic is not in ECOWAS. They're also in ECOWAS, probably suspended now and all that. But this idea of putting a prime minister is to show that they will get very quickly to the democratic process. What they are saying is that they don't want Bazoum to come back. Well, what ECOWAS is saying that they want Bazoum reinstated. So you already see that there's a line of divide. And so by doing what they're doing now, they will get the people of Niger, the Nigerians themselves, on their side. Because at the long run, no Nigerian wants the military rule to last forever. If this regime lasts for 2 years, runs the democratic process, there are elections, new political parties, I think everybody will clap for them. And so because we don't know, we have to give them a benefit of doubt that by appointing a prime minister, a civilian prime minister, they want to still follow a democratic process, or what I would call, it's not a democratic process, but a civilian process, so to say. So it's a master stroke. You're totally on point.
And the Prime Minister Zeni, he said that, you know what, guys, the junta is ready for talks with ECOWAS, and these talks are expected to take place in the next few days. What do you expect, you know, both parties to put on the negotiating table, you know, when they meet for these talks, as I said, expected in a few days? And how should both parties proceed with these talks? Alex.
Okay, we have examples that we can use. Things have been happening like this in Burkina Faso, in Guinea-Bissau as well. I think from the junta side, from the Nigerian side, they would say, reduce some of the embargo, because the embargo is biting hard quickly on the people. Continue the aid. What people don't know is that a lot of the aids that are supposed to go to Niger have been blocked, both from the US, the EU, the French government, and the ones coming from African Union as well, because all this is happening in Africa. And so they would like all those things to be reinstated so that the population doesn't suffer a lot before they become unpopular. That is from the Nigerian, military junta side. From the ECOWAS side, naturally, people want to see Bazoum going out with a bit of honor and in peace. I would suspect he will end up going on an exile, one of the friendly countries, or even out of the continent. Because I don't see the military guys allowing Bazoum to come back into government. It will not make sense. Why will you not do a coup and reinstate the same president you took out? That will not work. And I mentioned it earlier. Bazoum comes from the minority Arab part of Niger. They are not very popular. As in, nobody is going to miss him particularly because they are a minority, so to say. So most Nigerians will go for a fresh elections, maybe in 2 years' time, maybe in a year and a half, and then get new political parties, new leaders. I think that would be the best thing. So I think it's ECOWAS that will have to come a little bit towards Niger and not enforce the fact that they want Bazoum to be reinstated. That might not happen. That might be a blockade. It might be a point of serious blockade. So I think we would have to go to something a bit more democratic, where we give them time and hope they will honor it, unlike the Malian junta, because we speak of Niger, but there's a Malian junta that promised us to do elections last year, and the elections have not taken place. So we don't know how this is going to turn out, but I think they would ask for time so that they can put in place the democratic process. The military does not have any business running a country like Niger.
Interesting. Yeah, I don't know if both parties will step up from their position, especially ECOWAS, who have always insisted from the get-go that Mohamed Bazoum must be reinstated. And that's what they've been saying, he must be reinstated. But you're saying, Alex, that this can't happen. It's not going to happen because he's been taken away, and a lot of people have come out celebrating. So you're looking at probably both parties agreeing to compromise, ECOWAS saying, okay, you know what, we're taking the demand to have Bazoum reinstated off the table, but give us a timetable for the return to democracy, for fresh elections to be held, and then you go back to the barracks. Something like
exactly.
what happened in different parts of the world, like I think Sierra Leone.
It's happening often. That is the way to go. I would suspect that's the best way to go. It means ECOWAS leaving a bit of left, like leaving a bit of space to Niger. This will come with the intervention of the AU. We keep forgetting that ECOWAS is just a small branch of all these issues. The AU is bigger than ECOWAS in this affair. The AU can still intervene. The AU can still send a force intervention. We still have the United Nations. Now we're talking of EU and the US, the West. All these people can intervene. What we need to avoid is to make this case crystallize where it becomes a proxy war, where China and Russia are on one side and the West on the other side. This can still happen, but we have to prevent this. And the ball falls on ECOWAS to start to make peace with its neighbor. The Niger Republic is part of us. So as long as we create a situation of peace, these other countries, Western countries that have military and economic interests, will play our game. If we show a sign of confusion, then they will divide. I see the EU and the US being on one side, naturally, and Russia and China being on one side and the other side. This should not happen. That will be the worst thing that can happen, because that means we've gone back to the 1960s, where we have proxy wars, killings, kidnappings, and coup after.
Yeah. Alex, we talked about the negotiations, the negotiating process, and the talks that Prime Minister Zaine has talked about, both sides seeming to soften their positions and their stance. But there's an example in, I think, Mali, if I'm not mistaken, where, of course, a soldier took power and then returned power to the military, to civilians via elections, and went off. I'm trying to remember his name. I think he later came back to contest as a civilian. But more often than not, what we see is that these soldiers who come to power in Africa, I mean, we have several examples. I can show you the man in Uganda. I can also show you the man in Rwanda. I can show you the man in Togo, whose father came and never left. And the son is now there.
He became a civilian president.
Yes. Even Rawlings also left. Headed part to Liban.
Gaddafi is the same thing.
Yeah. So, are you sure that Chiani, having tasted, the beauty, the power of being president and not being in the barracks, will not want to say, you know what? Even Yahya Jammeh was a soldier. You know what? I want to be a civilian president, where Babariga, whatever they call it, Kaftan, and then translate himself from the Kaki to Babariga.
I think what's going to happen is a bit different. I think that is going to be the condition that ECOWAS is going to give. You have exactly hit the point on the nail. Hit the nail on the point, actually. That is exactly what the ECOWAS is going to give, that these guys must give guarantees that they're not going to be involved. That is not to say that the current prime minister will not be involved. In fact, he's the man that is rightly placed. If he prepares a good process, electoral process, nothing stops him from running. After all, he's a civilian. I'm talking of the prime minister that they appointed right now. But the generals who have actually done this coup will go out of it if they come back and say they want to rule. Because their whole idea in their initial speech was to rectify something that was going wrong. So they never said they were going to stay. In fact, they informed the council, not the government. They call it the council, which means they're supposed to be transitional. We have to give them the benefit of doubt. And then ECOWAS will put it on ground that if ever any of these generals come back to take part in government, the sanctions will come back. So what will happen is that the sanctions will be suspended, not removed. I said suspended. And then the airspace will be opened as well so that businesses can go on, people can travel, and then more aid will be allowed to enter. As we speak, Niger, that receives over $1 billion as aid, will not be receiving anything in the next months. The same thing from the EU, the same thing for France. This is the poorest country in the world. You can imagine what is going to happen in the next month. And we as Nigeria will suffer because refugees will come over to Nigeria. That one is guaranteed. And that's why we have people from the north, clerics and other elites, going to ask for peace because they know that they will be there at the front line of this crisis. So we hope that the generals will not stay and that they will hand over power, even if it's within a 2-year period. It will not be immediately.
In other words, what you're saying to President Bola Ahmed Tinubu, who is the chairman of the ECOWAS authority, is that he should let the Niger people breathe. Don't suffocate them.
Yes.
Is what you're saying to him. All right.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly.
Ambassador Keshi is back with us. Ambassador, if you can hear me, before I move over to the next question, I'm going to give a quote by the former governor of the Jigawa State. But before then, Alex talked about, the role of ECOWAS and the negotiations between ECOWAS and the junta. But in your opinion, does ECOWAS have right now the moral position, of neutrality to be able to negotiate going forward what happens in Niger, bearing in mind the fact they've taken sides and have upset the junta there? Should we be looking at probably United Nations or maybe even the African Union coming in to handle this negotiations going forward? Ambassador?
No, the United Nations and the AU will not come in directly because they've been working with ECOWAS up to this point. As we speak, I think the Peace and Security Council of the AU is meeting to take a position. But I can almost predict that what they will say is that they support all decisions taken so far by ECOWAS. And the United Nations is also going to take the same position. So you find that ECOWAS is the lead agency in this matter, and it's being supported both by the AU and the United Nations. So at the end of the day, it is what ECOWAS decides to do that both supranational organizations are going to support.
All right, Ambassador. The former, before I go to the next question, of course, as we speak, talking about the negotiations and you know, the role of the ECOWAS authority, the role of the African Union as well. As we speak, several emissaries, you know, both appointed and voluntary, have tried to mediate between ECOWAS and the junta, but the body has not on its own appointed a special envoy. We've seen several groups going, you know, to see the Nigerian junta, some of them sent by ECOWAS and the chairman of ECOWAS, President Bola Tinubu. Some of them have gone on their own and said, Mr. President of Nigeria, I want to go and I think I can bring some resolutions. But we've not seen an appointment of a special envoy, which is the practice we usually see, you know, on a global scale. So my question to you, Ambassador, is why do you think that we've not seen the appointment of a special envoy as we speak? And how important is it that a special envoy be appointed by ECOWAS to drive the negotiations going forward? And what kind of person would you like to see appointed as a special envoy for this Niger situation? Ambassador, briefly, please.
Well, you see, the point you raised leads me again to say that ECOWAS, you know, began this whole thing with some blunders. The way they handled it in the first place. And at the time they've taken a decision, before they sent an envoy in the person of the former head of state of Nigeria, General Abubakar, and the Sultan of Sokoto, at that time they've taken steps that for the junta was, you know, according to the junta, angered them, made them very upset. And as a result, they did not receive the Nigerian president's envoys. Now, what has happened over time is that failure itself has allowed other non-state actors of their own, you know, to get into the fray. And now that has made things very difficult for ECOWAS, because these non-state actors in the first place, before they went to Niger, they've already taken a position, we are against military intervention. So they now went to Niger. So you find a convergence of views between the non-state actors and the new leaders of Niger. And that's what they bring back home to convey to ECOWAS leaders. Now, that makes it very difficult for ECOWAS leaders to stay on course on what they had decided in the first place. This is why you see that ECOWAS is walking back its initial determination to use the military. But it's okay that ECOWAS is not going to use them, because it was wrong in the first instance to the military before negotiation. Now that negotiations seems to be back on the table, I think that ECOWAS should do the best they can to pursue that diplomatic, you know, negotiation to its logical conclusion. But, you know, the junta itself must do the best they can to meet ECOWAS halfway. What the junta is doing now is not very helpful. You cannot apologize for not receiving the delegation. You cannot claim that you want to negotiate. At the same time, the first demand of ECOWAS is make sure that the former president is in good condition, is safe. You are now threatening, in the first instance, you threaten to kill him. In the second instance, you say you are going to put him on trial. All these are not very helpful. So what they should do, in order to meet ECOWAS halfway and to create a conducive environment for negotiation, is to ensure that they release the former president, to his family, keep him under house arrest to start with. Then you can come back to ECOWAS and say, look, we have released the former president. He's in good condition. We are not harassing him. So let's deal with other issues. We want to come and explain to you why this happened. Or you can send somebody again to us and let's begin to talk. Now they have a prime minister who might be more intelligent in handling these matters. So I sincerely hope that ECOWAS itself will see an opening in what they have said, that they want dialogue. But the coup plotters, the new regime in Niger, must make an overture to ECOWAS so that they can begin to find a common ground to discuss to start with.
All right. Ambassador Joe Keshi is a former Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Permanent Secretary in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Nigeria. Of course, Alex Okonkwo, security expert. We'll take a short break. When we return, we'll do some more talking on the unfolding situation in Niger. You're welcome back. It's still Politics HQ right here on News Central TV. I'm Kofi Bartel, still discussing the unfolding situation in the West African nation of Niger, just north to the border of Nigeria from where we're broadcasting. And of course, the softening of stances by both the military junta right there in Niger and the ECOWAS authority. The ECOWAS authority on one side saying that they are putting their standby force in action to get the soldiers into Niger in a bid to return the country to democratic rule and reinstall the ousted President Mohamed Bazoum. On the other hand, of course, the junta leaders, particularly General Chiani, saying that they will kill Mohamed Bazoum if the ECOWAS forces set foot in Niger. Our guest tonight, we have Ambassador Joe Keshi, former Permanent Secretary in Nigeria's Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and of course, Alex Okonkwo, a security analyst. Gentlemen, thank you once again for your time. Ambassador, before I go over to Alex, while you're on the break, he cast some doubt on the ability of or the performance of Nigeria's President Bola Tinubu, who is the chairman of ECOWAS. In today's papers, we saw former governor of Jigawa State and chieftain of the Nigerian opposition People's Democratic Party, Malam Sule Lamido, who himself at one time was trying to be president. He described President Bola Tinubu as a novice in the field of international diplomacy. From what you've seen, Ambassador, of the president and his handling of the situation as chairman of ECOWAS, is such an assessment surprising, coming as a surprise to you?
Well, I think my former boss and friend Sule Lamido is playing politics to start with. But the truth of the matter is that, look, the president has just, Bola Tinubu has just taken over a little bit over 60 days. He does not have his team, in place. And truly, he has not been a strong person with the knowledge of international relations and the rest of it. But look, every president suffers from this kind of, problem. I remember, for example, that when Bill Clinton was coming to office, there were concerns that he was not well schooled in diplomacy, and there were concerns whether he'd be able to handle, the problems, the international problems that the United States was very much engaged in. The same fears was expressed, by, Republicans when they selected George Bush II to be president of the United States. So what they did was to set up a committee that they called the Balkans, that helped to groom George Bush II to understand the intricacies of foreign policy making and decision taking. That team was led by Condoleezza Rice. What happens here is that, our own leaders just get into office and then do not get their teams in place very quickly enough. And I'll say this, and I'll say this in many other interviews. During the election, the Association of Retired Career Ambassadors reached out to all the presidential candidates, the major presidential candidates, and we invited them to dialogue on foreign policy. none of them showed interest. Because as far as they were concerned, they had no idea of foreign policy. They were not interested. Foreign policy is not the kind of thing you go and begin to make promises. I will build roads, I will build it. So they wanted to win election by all costs, and they did not think that foreign policy will win them an election. But here we are. Foreign policy is the main issue that the current president of Nigeria now finds himself dealing with, and they are flip-flopping. Because one day, ECOWAS takes another decision. Now, non-state actors are even doing better than the governments of ECOWAS are doing. And why is this? Because the ECOWAS leadership did not bargain, did not understand that foreign policy is key, it's important, and could actually come at any time that you do not expect. So it's a lesson for me, for all leaders who want to rule this country, that they must, in their campaigns, elevate foreign policy, and ensure that there are discussions on foreign policy. So that gets them prepared. Look, they dealt with economics. Most of them had economists advising them. They had agriculturists advising them. But I'm not too sure that they paid deep attention to foreign policy in order to understand the intricacies of foreign policy. Now they are confronted with that problem. So as a result, you can see what's going on. They are flip-flopping. But what has happened in the whole process is that the mistakes they've made has been covered up by non-state actors going directly, with or without their permission, to discuss with the new leaders in Niger. And they are making progress. They are the ones actually helping to bring messages that these guys are ready to talk. So it's a lesson I hope that, decision makers will have to learn. If you are preparing for our office, do not just think that it's supplying water, building roads. That is all you are going to do when you are president. You are going to deal with far more, intricate problems than what, they are dealing with now.
All right. Very interesting, Ambassador. Alex, over to you. The Arewa Economic Forum has said recently, that the financial loss occasioned by the closure of the Nigerian border with Niger Republic, they're saying that the financial loss occasioned by the closure of that border amounts to about 13 billion naira weekly. 13 billion naira weekly. Now, is it too early for Nigeria to show some good faith, Alex, by reopening the border with Niger, or at least lifting other sanctions imposed on that country?
So, first thing first, I don't know where they got those figures from. We're not a particularly good country in keeping data, neither are the Nigerians. So I have a doubt on that figure. That said, we know that a lot of trade is happening between Nigeria and Niger, and that we are their main port. They use the Lagos port as their main port to bring in goods, because Niger is a landlocked country. With this in mind, I don't think the ECOWAS group can release or relax anything concerning trade embargo, because that will be one of the cards to play when negotiations start. And negotiations will start very soon. Because of the new prime minister who is there, and like the Honorable Ambassador has stated, this might be the right man to start discussing with. Those things will have to be put on the table. A process of electoral, doing the electoral process calendar has to be on ground before the trade embargo can be relaxed. Like I said, not removed, but suspended. So it's unfortunate. It's a pain that should give some result if properly done. It is unfortunate, also the ambassador mentioned it, that was the first thing we decided to do. This thing should have come after, once we have started discussing. But once it's already in place, it's not as simple as that to now remove it and then put it back in place. So it will be there for a while. We would have to start discussions. Maybe this might have the only good idea of forcing them to discuss quickly, because the juntas will not want to be in disfavor with their own population. So I believe what is going to happen, and this is of course a guess belief, is that it will push them to have the conversation very quickly, so that we can move to the next step of reducing the embargo and then setting up an electoral process. So it's unfortunate that it's happening first, and that is putting the cart before the horse, but we'll now have to deal with it.
Interesting. Ambassador Keshi, Russia last week warned ECOWAS that any military intervention in Niger Republic could end up escalating the situation. And of course, they're saying also that it will lead to, quote, a protracted confrontation, end of quote. That's coming from Russia, the Russian Federation, and the Russian government. Are we seeing a spillover? And no, Alex talked about this, a little bit before. But are we seeing a spillover of the tension between the West, and Russia playing out in Niger? And what are your thoughts on this, power play we're seeing play out in Niger between the West and Russia?
Look, I have always argued that we are giving unnecessary due credit to Russia or unnecessary due attention to Russia. Russia has practically no business in this matter and is trying to get into an area it does not really understand very well. Russia is, in a war it probably cannot win. Russia doesn't have enough arms and ammunition, and today is buying from China, from North Korea, and interestingly enough, all the drones it's using to fight Ukraine is coming from Iran. So as far as I'm concerned, look, they just want to be spoilers and just get into an area where they are not needed. So I will always argue that we should deal with this issue as a consensus, as an internal situation, and ignore countries like Russia who just want to get involved unnecessarily. There are 2 or 3 key countries that are relevant in this matter. The French, more because the French have their boots on the ground. The Americans, again, more because the Americans have boots on the ground. Now, it's very interesting, and people should not forget this. In spite of this, all these, the last couple of days, the coup and the threats of war and so on, the Americans have not pulled out their soldiers. The French have not pulled out their soldiers. And I do not see the Russians sending in troops into such a place. So we must understand the geopolitics being played by these countries.
All right.
And this is why in ECOWAS we must ask the question, we want to go to war in a country where the French have 1,500 men on the ground. The Americans also have people on the ground, and they are not pulling them out. That should make our leaders think twice, that they need to strategize on what to do.
Very interesting thoughts, Ambassador, you've shared on the prospects of Russia getting entangled in all of this, and reminding us that, they're still relying on others, like North Korea. That's quite interesting, to get weapons to prosecute their war on Ukraine, and they're not done with that. Will they want to commit other resources to a tiny West African nation? I don't know. Gentlemen, thank you very much for your time. I wish you could take more questions, but the time is off. Ambassador Joe Keshi, former Permanent Secretary and Nigeria's Ministry of Foreign Affairs, thank you very much for your time. And of course, Alex Okonkwo, Security Analyst, thank you very much for your time, gentlemen. All right, and that's the size of our package for now right here on Politics HQ. Trust News Central TV, of course, to keep you updated with all that's unfolding from the Republic of Niger. My name is Kofi Bartels. The program returns tomorrow.